Our next wonderful storyteller is one of my favorite actresses in town, Sue Bachman. Oh, you're sick.
Anything else? I have a bad back, so I have to sit. So when I heard about the theme, what's love got to do with it? Naturally, the first thing that came to my mind was How I Met Your Father, Courtney. I'm not what you would call an incurable romantic. I mean, I like flowers and candy just like the next person, but to me, what really says I love you is seeing my husband Cy of 30 years at the sink with a sink full of dirty dishes that he's just washed. Without me having to tell him. Or waking up to a steaming hot cup of coffee every morning for the last 30 years.
Whoa.
Or me creeping in at 1 in the morning after a show and him turning over in bed saying, "How was the show?" When I met Cy, it was June of 1979, and I had just broken up with my 5-year relationship with my college sweetheart. Paul and I started dating our junior year at Northwestern. He was an electrical engineering major, I was in theater. He was a big brother at my sorority, I was a little sister at his fraternity. We were the ideal couple in so many ways, I thought. When it came time to graduate, he had at least a dozen job offers waiting, very good companies, and he accepted a job with Inland Steel Corporation in East Chicago, Indiana, which was just like a suburb of Chicago. And I was lucky, maybe 2 or 3 months after graduation, to get one lousy job offer from DeVry Institute. But I was grateful because I could move out of the fraternity house where I was living and actually get an apartment. We continued dating. It was a hot and heavy relationship for a long time, and it was time to apply to graduate school. So I was conditionally accepted at DePaul in the MBA program, but Paul was relentlessly pursued by the big three, the University of Chicago, Stanford, and Harvard. And he had left the prior fall for Boston without me. Of course, we talked about marriage, but it was always if I was thinner, smarter, more athletic, somebody other than me, really. And, but we kept in touch. You know, we sent letters. Those were the days when he actually had to pay long distance charges to talk on the phone. And I sent him boxes of homemade cookies. And I even painstakingly needle-pointed him a beautiful elaborate throw pillow with Middle Eastern designs so that whenever he would lay his head down, he would think of me. But I'm not romantic. So later on, I found out he gave the pillow to his mother. He invited me out that November to visit him in Boston, and I spent the Thanksgiving holiday with his Harvard B School chums. And then we drove from Boston to New York City, and we saw The King and I with Yul Brynner, and we saw the sights. But by the end of this 4-day weekend, I still didn't know where we stood. And when I asked him, he really didn't have anything to say. And so when he didn't give me an engagement ring that trip, I knew that he never would. He came home a few weeks later for the Christmas holidays to the worst snowstorm in Chicago history. This was the winter of 1979. The city was buried for months. I'm in a studio apartment, and there it's him and me, waiting it out, knowing that he doesn't love me anymore. So I called it quits after that and never heard from him again. In the 70s, commitment was really kind of a dirty word. I didn't really know what was wrong with me. You know, I was slim, attractive, intelligent, at least I thought so. And so in desperation, I bought Gail Sheehy's book, Passages, which attempts to explain, you know, the different priorities that men and women have in the different decades of their lives, their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And sure enough, I was right on target. Women in their mid-20s were looking for commitment and serious relationships. And our male counterparts of the same age wanted nothing but job success. So even though it made me feel better in my head, in my heart, I was still alone. So I determined that I would get a new job, finish my MBA, and forget about finding Mr. Right. My good friend Jane Lehman, a nice Jewish girl from Poughkeepsie, said she predicted that my next serious relationship would be with a Jewish guy. I thought, well, I was skeptical, but I thought, well, okay, I'll keep an open mind. And sure enough, the next guy I met, I went to a disco, I met Larry, the lawyer, and he was another non-committer in his 20s. So in June of that year, I was lucky enough to get a job offer from Motorola. Motorola employed about 10,000 people in the Chicago area. And they had probably 2 or 3 jobs that needed to be filled, and I was hired to be a recruiter in the Human Resources Department. One of the openings was in the distribution department. So my boss on a Monday morning brought me up to meet Cy Bachman, who he described as a real maverick, which I didn't know what that meant, but I went to the appointment. I walk in the office, there he is, his arms behind his head, his feet up on the desk, telling me that my job was a waste of time, and in fact my entire department was nothing more than overhead. Then he whips out a little chart and shows me his new distribution organization, a little truck with little, you know, packages going out all over the country and so forth. Well, I hastily made all my notes, left his office thinking not only was he a jerk, he was an arrogant jerk. So, come Friday, there he is in my office, telling me that I needed to show up at the Hedon place, which was the Motorola watering hole, for drinks that Friday, otherwise I would never fit in this company. Well, I said, I'm sorry, I'm busy, I have a date with a lawyer. So he said, well, you blew it, you're never going to be anything here. So he leaves, and I think, well, what am I going to do? You know, that's my lesson in life, I guess. Well, the next Friday, he's back. So I didn't have a date that night, so I agreed to meet him at the Hedon place. So he picks me up at my office, but he says, well, Hedon place is too crowded. We're going to go to this other place. Neither one of us can remember the name, but we were the only 2 people in the place. This dark, little round tables with the little red candles and so forth, and an ashtray. So we sat there the whole evening drinking Chablis and chain smoking, because everyone who was cool then smoked. And we talked. And I found out he was Jewish. He was divorced, so at least at one time he'd been the marrying kind. He drove an RX-7, which was a hot little car. He had a townhome on a lake in a resort area, and he was 31. Things were looking up. So, you know, it took me a little while to get used to his sense of humor because it consisted mostly of leg pulling. He could tell a bold-faced lie better than anyone I had ever met before or since. He said he knew all about me because he'd read my name on the wall in the men's room, you know, for a good time. And then proceeded to regale me with stories of, you know, sexist kind of remarks like women should be kept in cages and let out only for breeding. So naturally you could see how a girl could fall for a guy like that. But by the end of the evening, he asked me what I thought of him. So, in my wine-induced insight, I told him I think you're lonely. And he glared back at me and said, you're right. Well, from then on, we were an item. So one of our first dates was going back to my hometown to a wedding of a childhood friend of mine. And he got to meet not only my entire immediate family, my brothers and their wives, but all of my neighbors as well, all in leisure suits. He was the only one there in a three-piece suit, so he immediately labeled them all Hicks. Unbeknownst to me, my parents had been arguing in the afternoon, and so my mother had left my dad at the table with my brothers while she was indulging herself in the champagne fountain. So by the time Cy got to meet her, she was 3 sheets to the wind. But despite all of these obstacles, he continued to call me. So we dated, we joined the Motorola, we were in the Motorola JCs together, we delivered meals to inner city families, we took poor children Christmas shopping, we learned how to teach blind people skiing, we went to see shows in Chicago, saw Annie and Chorus Line, we were seen at the company picnic together, and it wasn't long before we decided to move in together, which did not sit well with my very Catholic mother. She had the gall to say to him, "Why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free?" From Wisconsin, that's what you say there. But to his credit, he said, "You don't think much of your daughter, do you?" So his, the points went up very high for him. So we were getting along really well, and all of a sudden Motorola announced a layoff. And so Cy's job was eliminated along with dozens of others, and my job went from recruitment to outplacement. And he landed a job through a headhunter in this weird little town called York, Pennsylvania, the home of the Barbell. The York Barbell, and they had a Harley-Davidson plant, and eventually, without a real marriage proposal, we didn't really know what to do. We didn't want to break up, but it was too soon to get married. So Cy went on ahead, and then without a formal marriage proposal, I, in blind faith, followed him out there. He bought a house. I spent the summers stripping wallpaper and cabinets and painting, and got a job with an industrial air conditioning and refrigeration company. And it was a big, big change, from a major metropolitan area to this tiny town with mostly Amish people. And from lightweight electronic manufacturing to heavy-duty industrial stuff. Most of the people in York had never left the county, let alone the state. And we were the strangers, And they would eat things like red beet eggs and shoe fly pie and pawpaws and stuff like that. We were the strangers. We were invited to it was a very conservative community. My co-worker invited us over for Christmas, and everyone had to go around the room and say how they met and how long they'd been married. And it was very awkward to have to say, "We're not." So they got over the shock eventually. We threw parties, people came, had a good time, but nobody ever invited us back. It was just very odd. I got active in the York Little Theater. I got cast in a musical, the musical version of Agatha Christie's 10 Little Indians called Something's Afoot. And the playwright came in from New York and saw our production, and I was away from home several nights of the week for the rehearsals, and then it was like a 3-week production run where we performed 5 nights a week. Cy came to the shows, he sent me flowers from your secret admirer, and, but he, I think, missed me. So one of the dark nights of the show, we had dinner at our favorite restaurant. It was called The Office. And the people wore little suits that were the waiters, and the menus were inside of a manila folder. And they served little cups with sorbet to cleanse the palate between courses. This was not usual in the other Pennsylvania Dutch restaurants. But Cy took kind of a serious tone that evening, which was not like him. And he looked across the table at me and said, "You remember when I said, when I got my act together, we'd get married?" And of course, all of a sudden, my stomach started to turn. What was he going to say? Was it, well, I think I'm never going to get better, and so this is it, goodbye, or what? I just didn't know. And so I kind of nodded my head, yes, I remembered, and he said, "Well, I'd like to get married over Memorial Weekend." This was April. 6 weeks away. And I was stunned and delighted, and I don't know what I said, but I guess I said yes. So we were married May 24th, 1981, under the weeping willow tree in my parents' front yard in Wisconsin. And less than a year later, Cy was offered a position here in Colorado Springs with the Digital Equipment Corporation. And then from there we moved to Madrid, we moved to Houston, and we came back in 2000. And it hasn't always been easy, and it hasn't always been romantic, but it has been an adventure. We've been through the loss of a home, the loss of a business. But one thing we haven't lost is each other. And that's what love has to do with it.